And hello, we are back and we've got Dr. Amy Scott. Dr. Amy Scott, oh boy. Lovell, is that how you say your name?
Lovell, yeah.
Lovell. Okay, Dr.
Like the
Amy
astronaut.
Lovell. Ah, professor of astronomy over at Agnes Scott College. Um, and I think that's all I'm going to say. I'll let you take it away, Dr. Amy Lovell.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. So who do I have? Oh, I see. Am I supposed to be able to see people? Or let's
You
see.
should, if they turn on their cameras, wink, wink,
Ooh,
nudge, nudge.
I got it. Got it.
So I think some of the folks here you know.
I do. I know some of these people. Hello, people. All
These are all
right.
three Scotties, or these all the three Scotties here?
No,
Oh,
I don't know Aaron. Am I saying
oh,
it right?
Yeah, you're saying it right. And no, I don't go to that college.
okay.
All right. Where are you coming in from tonight?
Um, I'm coming in from Williamsburg, Virginia. I go to William and Mary.
Oh, okay.
Awesome. Well, it's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Okay. I had everything organized and then I moved my computer. So I have my notebook I gotta grab here.
Okay. That's who's missing. Sullivan's missing. Okay.
Another Scotty. All right. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to be here. I am excited about this, and I'm excited about how our Scotties are representing. And
I
that
know.
um, my that my enthusiasm for ham radio encouraged you all to apply for this program. So I'm glad you're here. Um, I have some pictures that I can show in a little while if you ask for them, but I thought I might just kind of talk a little bit before that. Um, so I'm Amy Lovell. My pronouns are she, her. I am a call sign KK4ZII. And I'm going to tell just a little bit about how I got into ham radio, and then we'll back up a little bit on how I got into science at all. But I'll start with ham radio because that's where we are, right? So I teach at Agnes Scott College. Agnes Scott, as a lot of you know, is a college, a liberal arts college in Atlanta for women and other underrepresented genders. And the alumni base of this college has a lot of variety because at first, there were no colleges that women could attend. And so women's colleges were the only option. And then there became other options. And then there became kind of a new mission for women's colleges, which was really like to bring education to people who had been left out of it somehow, or marginalized or disenfranchised in some way. So different eras of Agnes Scott alums have very different perspectives on the world, on education, on the role of women, on all kinds of stuff. So this is where we have an alum named Kathy, and he's a big advocate for the college. She lives in Decatur, and her spouse's name is Steve. And Steve is a big ham guy. And he was like, what Agnes Scott needs is a ham radio club. And we were like, well, tell us more. So he came to the college, and he talked to us about the options. In the Amateur Radio Relay League was having some educator workshops. And my colleague, who is actually now a Tibetan Buddhist nun, having gotten her start as a physics professor. So my colleague Rinchen that's her ordained nun name, went to the ARRL and took a course for professors and did a bunch of cool ham radio stuff. And as a part of it, got her ham license and it was this kind of special thing because she had, when she got the general level license, she was able to get her uncle's call sign.
Oh,
So
wow.
it's a very special, like,
That's
family
cool.
connection, that because she knew he had been a ham operator, and so it was kind of a special, like, keep it in the family kind of thing. It was that she got his general call sign. So I wish I had access to that. I could look it up, but I wasn't ready with her call sign. But anyway, I don't think she uses it much at the Abbey, although I guess they might. Um, so this was interesting to me because I have kind of a family history with radio as well. Um, so going like way, way back, my parents actually grew up as the children of missionaries in Belgian Congo, which is
Mm,
now the Democratic Republic of Congo.
mhm.
And so my father's a little older than my mom. And so when he came to the States to go to the college, they were apart. And so, they were interested in each other. They later got married. Spoiler alert. Um, and and what happened was he was actually not too far from you, Aaron. He was in Emory, Virginia, at Emory and Henry College, and he would go like out to this farm where there was a ham operator who would operate his radio and connect to the mission station's radio, and they could talk to each other. And this was in the 50s. And so this is a time when like mail took months to get there and there were no telephones. And
Mhm.
so it was really a cool way for them to connect. And I'd grown up hearing these stories about how, they would talk on the radio and in order to, keep their little romance going across continents. And so I was like, oh, wow,
That's
that's very
cool.
cool. That's very cool. And so
Sweet.
I was always like, "Oh yeah, ham radio, that sounds fun." I also had the opportunity to get a pilot's license when I was in graduate school, and you do a lot of radio operation, a lot of like some of the same kind of things, the phonetic alphabet you use, the frequencies, and just kind of on-air operations are fairly similar between pilots and ham operators in terms of being efficient and using the airwaves carefully, and like reading back things, or giving people indications that you can hear them correctly, and stuff like that. So this is all like radio. Radio is kind of cool. I also, of course, got my start in science as a radio astronomer in the millimeter astronomy world at the Five College Radio Astronomy Observatory. The Five College Observatory is no longer there, but is a partnership with an observatory in Mexico, the Large Millimeter Wave Telescope. The millimeter wave is important because if you call it the Large Millimeter Telescope, it sounds like you're talking about large millimeters. And I think that's a pretty strange name. It makes more sense in Spanish, the Gran Telescopio Milimétrico, because the
Mm,
modifier is on telescopio and
ah,
not the millimeter. So anyway, I like it better in Spanish. It's the GTM or the LMT. I have a picture of it I can show in a little while. Um, so anyway, that's kind of my how how I have an affinity for radio. And I thought it might be fun to kind of start with one of the potential questions that Jesse gave me was one of my favorite things to do with ham radio. And this was all about, remember Steve? Steve was the one who brought us the ham radio on campus. And actually it's the Alford Radio Club, which is sited a little bit to the east of us in the periphery of Atlanta. And they actually run the ham antenna that is on top of Stone Mountain. And
mhm.
those of you not from Georgia might not know anything about Stone Mountain, but it's this big, anomalous, giant granite rock that just sticks up where there's nothing else going on. Geology, we live on a strange planet. Geology is very strange. But anyway, it's this nice localized big rock. And if you put an antenna on top of it, you can see for a long way. And so it's a great ham radio repeater. And the Alford Memorial Radio Club runs that repeater on top of Stone Mountain. So that's who they are. And so they connected because one of the big, I don't know how much you've talked about what ham radio does and what activities ham radio people do, but one is an emergency management kind
Yep.
of activity, right? And so the it's, what does ARES stand for? ARES. It's Amateur Radio Emergency
Yep,
Services.
that's it.
Okay.
Bingo.
Um,
Ding,
and
ding, ding.
to do emergency services, obviously you don't want to wait till there's an emergency. And so one of the ways that ARES gets people prepared for emergency communication is in events. And the Atlanta Publix Marathon is one of the events that they use ham radio communication for. And so, when I first got licensed, they were like, oh, hey, we're going to have this marathon and we need ham radio operators to be at the different stations. And I was like, well, first of all, my daughter's a runner. I do a little bit of running. I think marathons are fun. I love races. It's like this whole thing where you stand around with a cowbell and encourage people to run by and enjoy themselves. It's good sport. It's good outside time. And I just didn't know that they used ham radio for that. And so, you just go with your little handy talkie and you go to a station and basically you say things like, first runner, bib number, whatever, just passing aid station 11, or whatever it is. It's just really fun to spend the day out on the marathon. And nominally, what it is just a communications network, and practicing being part of a communications network, and practicing being part of a connection with other hams, and communicating on going to a central control or going to a local network and using all the different frequencies. And it's just a really good way to practice ham communications that would be useful in an emergency situation. Of course, if there is a medical emergency on the marathon course, like you get and maybe not even an emergency, but if you get a runner who is tired or cold or is decided not to run anymore, they have these SAG wagons that they send around to pick up runners who are done running. And that might just be I'm done, or it might be, I'm having a health problem right now. And so it's good practice for emergency operations to be like, this is aid station 11. Go ahead, aid station 11. You're like, aid station 11, runner, bib number, whatever. And so anyway, I feel like I've gotten a lot of good ham practice doing marathons, and actually volunteering for a marathon is quite fun. And that's been probably my favorite thing to do. And we've typically done that annually. In 2020, actually, one of the last things I did before the dreaded shutdown of 2020 was the Olympic time trials for the marathon that were held right here in Atlanta. And they had the the people trying to do the qualifying time for the Olympics. And essentially it's where they would get whether they would get to compete in the Olympics, that then of course were postponed. But it was cool to have done like these kind of local marathons and to see people who were just out there to have fun running a marathon. You always have competitive runners, but watching the Olympic quality marathoners run this race was incredible.
Wow.
It was actually incredible. And my assignment on that was to shadow. So they had the men's race, they had the women's race, they had hydration stations. Like each individual runner could make their own hydration. Like if you wanted Gatorade, if you wanted Powerade, you wanted whatever it was. So they had customized bottles with their little labels on it and things like this. And so there was a chief for the women's race and a chief for the men's race. And they said, because these race chiefs are, how do I say this in a politic kind of way? A lot of ham operators are a lot older than all of you. And this is one of the reasons that we would like to have younger ham operators, and especially in the Atlanta area. We have a lot of retired hams. And so the race chief needed a shadow who was somebody who could basically like run around after them and keep up with them. And they didn't want that to be somebody who was a little slower. And so I was the women's race chief shadow, and basically just followed her around, and anything she needed called in, I called it in. And and my husband was the equivalent for the men's race. And so we had a good time following the race chiefs around and scurrying around after them and asking for things and being like, we need more tape. The water bottles are falling over in the wind, or whatever it was. So that was a good experience. So that's been my favorite thing to do with ham radio. And I highly recommend it. When y'all are not licensed yet, but you will be soon. Is that the plan?
That's the plan.
Okay. So when you get your license, if you have the opportunity to volunteer for, I mean, it doesn't have to be a marathon. It could be a 5K, it could be a 10K, it could be any kind of race, wherever you happen to be. Those of you who are in Atlanta, if you want to volunteer, I'd be happy to connect you because I intend to continue volunteering for these marathons. Um,
Excellent.
anyway, let me pause there and just see if you have any questions about the where I've gone so far, reactions to anything.
Well, I have a comment that's very interesting. There's
Mhm.
another person that we've had speak, Doug. Oh, what's his call sign? Kilo Zulu 3 Hotel, who's also a pilot. And he's been involved in emergency management for quite some time. So it just dawned on me that we've had another speaker who's a pilot and a ham. So he likes to fly drones too. So
You
so
know,
anyway, just a slight
lots of
comment.
fun. There's lots
Yeah,
of fun
yeah,
things
it's
to do
fun, fun stuff.
with radio. Um, and so just to kind of transition into some of the scientific things I'm doing, I had the opportunity in, I believe it was 2006, to take a sabbatical year from the college, and we went to Puerto Rico and we lived at the Arecibo Observatory, or we lived in
Oh,
Puerto Rico
wow.
near the Arecibo Observatory. And so I spent a year there. And of course, has Angel Vasquez talked to you? Is he on your list?
No, no.
Okay. Uh, Angel is one of the longtime telescope operators at and like technical people at the Arecibo Observatory, and he's a huge ham. And he um, was essentially the lifeline for the central part of the island after Hurricane Maria. All of the
Whoa.
power was down. There was no communication. Nobody could use their cell phone. Nobody had power. People wanted to know if their loved ones were alive or dead. And Angel was, through the ham radio, communicating with people on the mainland and getting the word out gradually about who was okay and who needed help. And you know, he was able to kind of navigate impassable roads and get to people and
Wow.
connect through ham radio networks across the island to other hams, as well as, you know, just trying to make sure that people knew who was alive and well, because people were really worried that their loved ones were in harm's way. And I
Do you
really
know
was
his
like,
call
oh,
sign?
on hell, I
Just
can
curious.
tell you. I can tell you. I don't know it offhand, but I know exactly where to look, because you just, all you have to do is look it up and say ham and it'll come right up.
Okay, okay.
He is
I'm the,
Whiskey Papa 3 Romeo.
oh, I
Does that sound
think,
familiar now?
yes. I think he's been in this area. I think I've heard him on the NASA repeater a few
Hmm.
times. I think because I'm not far from Goddard.
Okay.
So
Yeah, yeah.
I think he's been on the net, the NASA employee net. I think he's been on that. Okay, all right. Thank you.
So anyway, I was just like, I mean, I knew that ham radio was useful for emergency communications, but the value of it was really, really solidified for me in recognizing that, and my Spanish is not terribly good, but it is good enough that I was able to go to our ham station on campus and try to like listen through and see what I could hear when, you know, in the post Maria few days, just to hear, you know, and I would try to like listen in when I could hear the hear voices in Spanish, just to see if they were talking about Puerto Rico or if they were talking about what was happening in the post hurricane, because you know things were really dire there, and
Mm,
it still almost remains dire because the infrastructure has not been really well reestablished, including the power network. So it is, the ham radio continues to be an important way of communicating for people
mm,
at times when power goes out. So that really solidified it to me, that it was like, wow, this is a great thing to do. And I was like, well, it'll be really nice to have this capability and have this capability on our campus in case there's any emergency. Thankfully, we haven't had any emergencies of this nature on our campus, but we did, you know, the Southeast had a bunch of terrible storms just this week. And
Yeah.
And we had some pretty severe thunderstorms here last night. So, these things can happen. So anyway, that's my commercial on when I realized the real value of ham radio emergency communications, because you just never know when something's going to strike. And it's nice to have that. Um, um, it's really nice to have that backup. So the other thing is, this is compared to the gravity of a life-threatening hurricane, very mild. But honestly, as somebody who likes to go into rural areas and does not have very good cell phone service or does not have a very fancy cell phone, I've often been in situations where I've been in a place where I need to communicate with somebody and I'm outside cell coverage, because I like to go to places where cell coverage is not good. And so where we go to Thanksgiving for my family is in the mountains in North Carolina.
Huh.
And what we do is we just each have an HT in our car. And if we need to
Huh.
communicate to the other car, we just use ham radio, because as
Wow.
long as you've got line of sight to the other car, you can communicate. And honestly, it is in states that are, Georgia is one of those states where there is a hands-free law for cell phones. It doesn't apply to ham radio. You are
Hmm.
allowed to touch your HT in your car. Now, of course, a lot of people have like a push to talk or something like that, so you don't have to, be distracted. But it's simpler than a cell phone, right? You're not dialing, you're not touching a screen. You just push a button and talk to it, and then you set it back down and you push the button and talk to it. So
Huh.
it has been a way to keep in touch when in multi-vehicle rural travel. I have really enjoyed I really enjoyed ham
Oh.
radio for that. Once you get your general level license or higher, you get international reciprocity in a lot of countries. And we had an experience taking 4 octogenarians to Canada last May. My 2 parents and my spouse's 2 parents,
Oh, wow.
we took to Newfoundland. Newfoundland is rather rural. There's not a lot of people there. It is a amazing natural setting, just a
Wow.
gorgeous place. And if you're a geology nerd like I am, it has some really interesting geology as well. So
Huh.
in Newfoundland, we were able to use our reciprocity privileges to operate as U.S. licensed hams in Canada, and so we
Huh.
could use those we could use the radios between our cars, or like if somebody's hiking or something like that. It was a terrific way to stay in touch in a place where an international cell phone plan is incredibly expensive, and you don't want to have to
Huh.
pay to get your cell phone to work in another country. But the ham radio with reciprocity is completely free.
Oh, wow. Do you have to notify the government that you're going to before you arrive
It
in
depends.
this?
The ARRL has an international reciprocity list, and you can just look up the country. For Canada, what you do is you give your call sign slash, oh, what is it? Now I forget. I had it all worked out when we were in Canada. You say your call sign with a slash something that indicates you're a foreign operator. And then
Okay.
instead of just transmitting like you would if you were in the States, you say and then you give, like we were in St. John's, Newfoundland in the city, you could say, this is KK4ZII stroke, remember what it was. It's not U for USA, but it's something like that. And then,
Hmm.
and you would say in St. John's, Newfoundland, and then,
Ah.
so you give your location. And that way, I guess if there was any concern about your operations or being nefarious or something like that, they would know where to find you. I don't know why you do that, but that's part of the Canadian reciprocity. So yeah, it's pretty simple. You just add
Huh.
a couple of things to the things you say when you transmit, and then it's the same thing as it is in other places. You identify your call sign every 10 minutes or so, and just the usual ham stuff. But you do have to have at least a general license. The technician level license doesn't have reciprocity in most countries. It's another
Interesting.
advantage. You get a higher level, go for the general.
Excellent. We are. We're attempting to do that.
Good.
They'll have the option this summer, right after we get through this
Yeah.
course.
Okay,
Excellent.
cool. So then of course, what do you do with ham radio if you're a nerd? You got to do some science. And so my friends from Agnes will recognize this friend that I have here. This is Flat Agnes. I don't know if you can see, she's a stern looking lady.
It's pretty
And
stern.
they put her on these little like cards because our students have a travel program, and this way Agnes can like photobomb your picture, or you know, you can be like, I'm Agnes. And so when our students travel, and I guess y'all just did, didn't you? You just went on trips. Did y'all have Flat Agnes with you? Okay, you see. So Flat Agnes came about for the 125th
That is great.
anniversary of Agnes Scott College. And they were like, we're gonna send these out, and people can print out an Agnes. They actually put it in the alumni magazine and sent it to people, and we're like, okay, let's have your pictures of Agnes everywhere in the world. Show us your Agnes. And so they were like, okay, how can we get Flat Agnes into all kinds of different places? And I was on this 125th anniversary committee, and I was like, no, this is good, but this is not as good as it could be. Agnes needs to go to space. And so we were like, I don't know, can we get Agnes to the International Space Station or something like this? And of course, we were a little ambitious about what we might do with Agnes, but we were able to put Agnes on a stratospheric balloon and send her high enough that it was considered near space.
Ooh,
And if you're willing, I'll show you a couple of fun little pictures of
cool.
Agnes going to space. Let me see if I can get this to work. Okay, so if I go here and I do slideshow on this screen, and then I say share screen and I share the second screen, maybe that will work. Tell me if you can see Agnes.
It's coming. There it is. Wow, cool.
Okay, so this is what I call Flat Agnes in the stratosphere. So technically,
Cool.
it's not really space, but if you look at this picture, you can see that the sky is black, and that cannot happen when you're in enough of an atmosphere that we can breathe. So just to show you a couple of things. So this is 125th anniversary, and I was like, Agnes needed some high adventure, not just, I mean, the Taj Mahal and the Eiffel Tower and Ayers Rock, you know, these are all great things, but she needed to be in space. So that's
This
Flat
is
Agnes.
cool.
So we designed this thing. You mentioned, Jesse, you're using a Raspberry Pi. We used Arduinos to do the data logging. Basically, it was just constructed up out of balsa wood to be as lightweight as possible. And then we had, you know, all these various Arduino things, accelerometers, compasses, pressure and temperature altimeter, a couple of simple Canon PowerShot cameras. And we had GPS through the both through the Android and through the APRS, the amateur packet radio. Yeah.
Yep.
And we also had a Geiger counter on it, you know, just to
Oh,
see
nice.
what would happen. And so everything was written to SD cards. So we had to recover this payload when it came down in order to get any of these pictures or any of the data. So we only just had position when it was going up. We needed to have the SD card. So we had to recover it. So the idea is that the ham radio transmitter on the payload was transmitting its position so we could go find it when it was done. It also just kind of had a beacon, and we could use one of those little, like, I don't know if you made the antennas out of the tape measures.
Not yet. We haven't. Yeah,
Okay,
not yet.
well, students said, Agnes, come see me and I'll show you our tape measure antenna that we use just to kind of do direction finding and find these payloads. It did end up being very helpful. So here's a picture of our little payload. You can see the foam, you can see the Arduino there, and you can see, you know, it's just very simple. There's that antenna, and we had tape on the end of it so it didn't poke anybody in the eye. And this is what it looked like as we were getting ready to hoist it up. So there's the payload. There's the big balsa wood stick with Agnes sitting on it. We did shrink her down, and my son, who's a huge fan of the Apollo program and Mercury, you know, like the early space program, photoshopped John Glenn's space helmet onto Agnes so that she would be safe in the stratosphere. And then what you see there is this thing is a radar reflector, so that we didn't
Oh,
have to worry about airplanes not seeing this thing and having an accident with it. It actually is
oh,
designed with the flat surfaces to reflect radar in a lot of different directions. And then this red thing is the parachute. All right. So here is what our, let's see, the predicted is the red line. So we had to go pretty far outside Atlanta. You're not allowed to launch a balloon inside any big airport airspace, right? So we had to be really far from Atlanta in order for this to be legal to do. Actually, you can't really launch even within any controlled airspace at all. So any airport with a control tower, you can't launch a balloon in that region. And so we wanted to be far enough that we knew that as it was flying, it would not get in the way. So what you see here is the plan is as the balloon goes up, you put in a rate of ascent, expected
Mhm.
ascent from the helium in your balloon, and then it calculates in the stratospheric wind or the tropospheric and stratospheric winds,
Oh,
and then
wow.
you see what it predicts that it's going to do. Whoops. I
Oh,
was
that's
back. I
cool.
didn't want to
This
go
is so
back.
cool.
And so the yellow is our GPS from the ham radio that told us where it actually went. And the red is the prediction. So it wasn't too bad, I'd say.
Yeah, really close, actually.
And in the end, what really happened, okay, so here's a couple of pictures. So you see Agnes in her, you see her little space helmet there.
Mhm.
It was just Photoshop. And so this is, we launched from a state park. And, you know, here she is, she's going up and you can start to see the ground is getting away pretty fast, right? This balloon was doing a good job of ascending and it was nice, clear day, a little bit hazy in a couple of
Wow.
places, but now you can see a big lake down there. You see a few clouds. We're definitely above the clouds at this point, and it just keeps going. And you can see as you get higher in the
Wow.
atmosphere's thinner and the color gets darker and darker. Is that the last one? Yeah, that's the last one. So this is the highest we got. It was definitely over 100,000 feet. This was
Wow.
probably about, I don't know, we have it in meters. I'll show you on the graph here. So the issue is, okay, so when it got to the top, what happens is it goes up until the helium balloon, it's just a thin like latex balloon. The balloon will burst because what happens is as the gas pressure gets as the atmosphere gets thinner and thinner and thinner, the gas contained in the balloon gets bigger and bigger and bigger and essentially puts so much pressure on the latex that eventually it bursts.
Break.
And you don't know exactly how high that's going to be, but you can get some guesses. And so we were at the mercy of, you know, the atmospheric pressure as to when it was going to burst. But when it burst, of course, the air is too thin for a parachute to work. What you hope is that it'll fall relatively quickly, and then the parachute will start to
Boy.
drag through the thicker air and eventually slow your parachute down. Apparently, while the thing was falling, when the balloon burst, some of the balloon shards kind of wrapped around the parachute lines.
Oh,
And so
wow.
it basically just plummeted for, you know, like 80,000 feet. And
Wow.
so I will show you here. This is what the balloon shards and the parachute that almost never like really deployed. So this is us, you know, after we found it with the ham radio antenna, we knew we kind of triangulated where it was going to be. And basically we found out later with our data analysis, it was going like 40 miles an hour when it
Okay.
landed. And so it just kind of plunged down through this tree and went splat on the ground. And you can see that it's kind of exploded. You see the little explosion here. This is our happy team. You can see it was a hot summer day. We were all a little sweaty and we were in the forest, but we were happy. And you can see, you know, there it is where we found it. And honestly, I think if it had been coming down with the parachute nice and slowly, it probably would have been 30 feet or 40 feet or 100 feet up in that tree. And so it's probably good for us that it actually fell so quickly.
Yeah.
So anyway, here's the graph of what it did. So the altitude, you can see very nice, gentle rise up through the atmosphere. And at the moment the balloon burst, you can see it did not come down slowly.
Yeah. Look at that.
It went just screaming down. And so the fact that it never got to the point that it slowed down and this slope changed because of the atmosphere, it meant the parachute never worked. But that's
Wow.
okay. We got it back very quickly. But interestingly enough, because it fell so quickly, the ascent temperature, this is a really nice atmospheric lapse rate, just the same thing you experience when you hike up a mountain and it gets cooler and cooler and cooler as you go up.
Mm.
You actually get to the tropopause and started going up in temperature into the stratosphere. You can
Hmm.
see all of the things that you can see in terms of atmospheric conditions, but because it fell down so quickly, it didn't have time to come to equilibrium. It preserved
Ah.
the stratosphere temperature for about 25,000 feet.
Huh.
And then it, eventually turned around. So there's a big thermal lag on the fall because it was so quick. So I think
Wow.
this is one of my favorite graphs. You said, what was one of my favorite things to do with ham radio? Data. I love data.
That is
And then
cool.
I also can't resist showing this graph, which is the Geiger counter that was on board. And I actually took this, one of the things that I've done that I really enjoyed in terms of radio frequency is served on the Committee on Radio Frequencies, which is a National Academies committee that works with other national and international organizations to kind of protect the radio spectrum. And I had just done this experiment and I went to it's called CORF. I went to the CORF meeting and I was like, why did this happen? So, the Geiger counts went up, like there's very few Geiger counts. So this is just radioactivity basically. And essentially what you're doing is counting cosmic rays. You go up
Right.
and it gets higher and higher and higher and higher. But at about 50 or 60,000 feet, it turned around and went back down. And
Huh.
I was not expecting that. But one of the CORF members who knew a lot about the atmosphere was like, oh, that's, and explained the whole physics behind it and why it worked. And I was just like, well, we observed it.
Huh.
But apparently it's like where you get multiple cosmic rays or the cosmic rays get absorbed in the part of the atmosphere where there's some additional ionization. And so this is a prediction that was going to happen. I just didn't know we were going to see it, but
Oh,
I
wow.
think this is
That
a
is
very
cool.
cool graph. It's a very
Yeah,
cool graph.
indeed. Huh.
Anyway, yeah, there's that. And then I promised I would show you, this is the Five College Radio Astronomy Observatory. That's a radome, which is a Gore-Tex dome that contains the radio telescope inside it. And so basically it protects it from the weather and the wind, but the Gore-Tex is is millimeter wave transparent. And so you can you can receive emissions from space inside that dome and not have to worry about your telescope getting buffeted about in the wind or rained on or whatever. Then they decommissioned that telescope and built the large millimeter wave telescope no, where's my LMT? There's no LMT here. Well, there was supposed to be a picture of the LMT here. Is it invisible? Huh. I swear I put it there.
Hmm.
Well, all right, never mind. It looks like
Is
a
it
big
an
dish.
animation?
I don't know. It says I'm
Hmm.
on the last slide, doesn't it?
Yeah. Huh. Interesting.
All right. Well, anyway, let
Oh,
me see
well.
if I can find this thing and I'll maybe what it's done. Oh, maybe it just froze.
Uh-oh.
Oh, or maybe it was off the screen. I think it was not
Oh.
on the slide. I thought it was a wide format slide. Okay, let's try this again. And I go to share screen one more time. This is the last one, I promise. And then we're going to go back to actually talking to each other.
But this is cool, though. Thanks for
Oh,
showing.
okay. I'm glad you enjoy it. So now can you see it?
Yep.
Okay. So, so this is the dish that is inside that dome is a 14-meter telescope. So that's 40 some feet. The telescope on the one in Mexico that's pictured on your left is a 50-meter radio telescope. So like half the size of the Green Bank telescope. Yeah, it's a very large millimeter wave telescope. And for its frequency, which operates to 300 gigahertz, I think that's true, in the 300 gigahertz range, it actually has some receivers that can go up even higher than that, but the primary operating frequency is 200 to 300 gigahertz, and it is the largest collecting area for that frequency anywhere. And it was a big factor in that cool black hole image that was made by the Event Horizon Telescope. So that is you know, it's a good reason to protect the electromagnetic spectrum. There's a lot of cool science that you can do collaborating with others internationally, and you just never know which telescope is going to be the most important one in a given experiment. And so, um, you know, I've always had a love for radio astronomy, so ham radio seemed like a kind of natural extension
Hmm.
for that. All right, so I showed you a bunch of pictures. I talked to you about a bunch of fun science. What reactions do you have to this? What do you want to talk about?
I have a question.
Mhm.
What is a Geiger count? I don't know.
Oh yeah, so Geiger counter is it's a radioactivity sensor. And so a Geiger counter, if you've ever seen like movies where there was like radiation and somebody was like, you know, trying to look for radioactive sources or something like this, they carry this thing around and it goes click, 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 click. It's one of those, except it doesn't have to make the clicks, right? This was, so the Geiger counter is measuring high energy radioactivity. It's counting basically. So if any of those counts were a hit from a packet of radioactivity, and they use Geiger counters to like ensure that there's no radiation leaking, say at nuclear power plants, or if there's like a place where, I mean, we live on a radioactive planet. The Earth does give off radioactivity, and it's kind of interesting to see what gives off radioactivity when we want to test the thing. My husband has his uncle's old gold watch that he was given when he retired. It's kind of like one of those things they always give somebody a gold watch when they retire. This is something they used to do in the past, and it had a radium dial on it so that it glowed in the dark. And that thing really triggers that rate. We keep it in a box, but when we want to show somebody how a Geiger counter works, we bring it out, and it's just like. So anyway, that's just it's essentially a radioactivity counter, and so it's something to think about. If you looked at that graph and you think about when you fly in a plane, people are concerned about, you know, radiation exposure in various things, like if you get an X-ray, or if, you know, if you have radon in your house, or if you are, you know, working with radioactive sources in a research lab or something like this. All of these are places you might have exposure to radiation, but people don't really think about flying. And that when you go up in the stratosphere, you have a lot less protection from the atmosphere, and you get exposed to a lot of radiation. It's short duration, which is why you don't really worry about it. But pilots actually have a very high incidence of various cancers because of the fact that they spend a lot of time in the stratosphere unprotected.
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah, flight crews. There's a rising cognizance about flight crews and their exposure.
Huh. Huh. Interesting. Good
Huh.
question.
Yeah, what else do you want to know, or what else did I not explain that you want clarification? Keep going, Kimberly.
Okay, I have a question. When you guys sent the like balloon in the air and you got the photos, how did you like time the photos? Was it like recording like a video, and like, or like how did you time photos?
I
It
wanted to
was
ask
these,
that question too.
yeah. So those cameras that we have are programmable. And so what we had was they were just programmed. I don't remember what the interval was now, but I think it was just programmed to take an image every 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And so we started the program. We had a camera on both sides. There was the image with Agnes in it and the image without Agnes in it. Just so that we have a kind of control experiment. And also sometimes we wanted, the Agnes thing was a stunt in order to have cool space pictures with Agnes in it, but we also wanted unobstructed pictures of the stratosphere. so we had both sides. And so what we did was we hit go on one camera and we hit go on the other camera about 15 seconds apart, so that about every 15 seconds there was a picture being taken on one side of the payload, and you don't know which way it's going to go because it twists around, it floats around in the atmosphere. So that way we were pretty sure we were seeing pretty much everything we wanted to see. So it was just a programming feature on the menu of the camera that we could just program it to automatically take a picture every so often. And the other thing I didn't talk about, this is not ham radio related, but it's still fun science, is that it gets cold as you go up in the atmosphere, and battery operated devices like cameras don't typically react well to being cold, and the batteries would die. And a lot of ways of keeping things warm, because we had it insulated as well as we possibly could, but a lot of ways of keeping warm, like if you have those little hand warmer things you can like put in your
Mhm.
pocket when you're mountaineering or going to
Mhm.
a being out for the day, those are all chemical. They depend on oxygen in order to
Oh,
have a
wow.
heat reaction. So when you are in the high atmosphere and there's no oxygen, those don't work. So it's a question: how do you keep your electronics warm? We ended up getting a a battery pack that was like a little USB powered like hand warmer that's electric. And of course, it could only last until its batteries lasted, but it was at least generating heat enough to keep itself. And that kept the cameras working. One of the cameras failed sooner than the other. We were just lucky that the one with Agnes in it lasted longer than the one without Agnes in it. But we did all kinds of tests, like putting the cameras in the freezer and, trying to, at some point, there was a cooler and some dry ice involved. And, we were really trying to make sure that this worked. But there were a lot of technical challenges. And I probably should have disclosed that my spouse is an engineer. And so there was a lot of
Oh,
this
okay.
that was eagerly engaged in terms of experimental design for keeping things warm and designing anyway. In the name of full disclosure, I didn't have everything to do with all of the experimental design, but I did enjoy analyzing the data when we got it back. Other questions? Reactions?
I
So,
think it's cool. That's really neat. That's really, I just have this vision. So so you used APRS to track the device, right?
yes. Yeah. So
Okay,
the
so were
idea
you
is,
driving around as as you were getting the signal, or how did you do? I'm just curious about.
yes, it is a little bit like a scavenger hunt, like you need somebody to do the driving and somebody to do the navigating and being like, well, I think we need to turn left on this road, and, and it is kind of fun to try to chase one of these things down. We did this again, actually, this was the Agnes experiment, but we did this again in 2017 for the solar eclipse. We
Oh,
wanted to
wow.
take a picture of the shadow of the eclipse on the Earth from the stratosphere,
Oh, wow.
and went to one of our Scotty's uncle's farm in Kentucky to try to do this experiment. And in that case, the APRS transmitter on one of the balloons failed. I think we over tightened
Oh,
the antenna connection or something. And
oh.
so in that case, we were not able to recover that payload,
Mm.
even with our cool little direction finding antenna, because it wasn't transmitting. Apparently the transmitter was just not functioning even when it went up and back down. So it still had the Arduino based GPS. It wrote the GPS into the data, but we didn't have the ability to track that one. And because apparently my student's uncle knew everybody in that county, and apparently he sold seeds to lots of farmers, and so a lot of farmers knew who he was. So in addition to like my little Agnes Scott business card with, so when you launch something up into space and you don't know where it's going to fall down, you don't know who's going to find it, it's written all over it: harmless radio transmitter, harmless radio transmitter. This is a harmless radio transmitter. So you have to be careful that somebody doesn't find this weird thing that might be still going beep or having, like electronics noises or something to it. You want people not to be worried about it. So we were like, please don't destroy this thing. It is perfectly safe. And so the eclipse was in August. I think it was actually September or October. We actually got a phone call from the farmers who had unfortunately just run over this thing with a combine.
Oh, wow.
But, to be fair, this thing was so robust. That camera, that little Canon PowerShot programmable camera, even after they ran over it with a combine, they booted up that camera and took their own picture. We have a selfie of the two like combine drivers
That's funny.
before they called the uncle, who then called us and said, we've got your payload. So we ended up getting both balloon payloads back from the eclipse. One of them we got that same day with direction finding, and the other we didn't get back until 3 months later.
Oh, that's cool. So you had all your data. That's great. That was really
Yeah. We got all of our data. We were able to see, it was similar in terms of, we didn't take the Geiger counter on that one, but we did have altitude, we had temperature, we had pressure, we had, pictures, good stuff.
Hey, that's great. That's great.
And so, this is the kind of like random science that you can do if you have the ability to have something transmit and tell you where it is, and that you have a license that allows you to do that. So we were able to do two, because I have a license and my spouse has a license. And so each balloon, one of the balloons was transmitting on his call sign and one on mine.
Okay.
The more licenses you have, the more experiments you can do.
Excellent. That is so cool. That is really cool. More questions? Well, I guess, okay. I don't see any more questions. Anything else you want to share with us, Dr. Lovell?
So, I mean, I can tell a little anecdote that might be helpful in your quest for your own. Am I going to do it? You want to be part of another balloon experiment, Belle? Well, suppose that's a possibility. We didn't have an eclipse or a reason to do another one, but it is kind of fun. And if you think that would be a fun thing to do, let's talk about that. Let's talk about that as a, Scotty science thing to do. And it was, my story was, I was gonna, just kind of say that, one of the questions you had asked was, was there a time when I experienced some kind of discrimination or difficulty, and how I might have overcome that. And if you go way back, like all the way back to like middle school and high school, I did my schooling in rural Tennessee. And I feel like my parents were very encouraging of me. My family was, they didn't understand me, but they loved me. And I think I was just this inexplicable, I don't know what this kid is. But as a girl in the 70s and 80s in rural Tennessee, I had very limited exposure to science, and I had very limited expectations on me. Like nobody really expected me to become anything important. And in some ways, what that meant was, it kind of meant I was perfectly free to be an astronomer, because nobody was like, well, you got to do this, or you got, like, nobody had an expectation on me that was violated by becoming an astronomer, which is a very weird thing to do in terms of like people's family expectations of, you got to be doctor, lawyer, teacher, preacher, whatever, those things basically meant that I didn't really like science very much. I loved math, but I didn't like science. And so going to a women's college, because I went to Agnes Scott myself, I should have said that earlier, probably. Going to a women's college was very important, because it's a liberal arts college. Colleges make you take classes. They made you take a science class. And I was like, oh, well, chemistry is kind of scary. And I really hated biology, because it was the baseball coach that taught my biology class, and he didn't like it either. So why was I going to like it? And and I had not been able to take physics, because I kid you not, girls didn't take physics. My brother took physics, and I did not take physics. He took computer programming. I did not take computer programming. These were things that nobody questioned it. I don't feel like it was something that if I had said, I want to take physics or I want to take computer science, that they would have told me no. But no one, it just was an unquestioned stereotype. And so from that perspective, I didn't really like science. I took astronomy to get my science credit out of the way. And then I liked it a lot. So, basically, that was my kind of experience of just sort of not really feeling like anybody had high expectations for me. But on the other hand, that meant I was free to do the things that I wanted to do. So when it
Hmm.
came to doing the ham radio license, this was a very interesting experience for me. There was one of those like ham radio test things, and the club had certain people who were, examiners and could run the tests, and they had like all the forms from the ARRL and the FCC forms and all this kind of stuff. And so they had the test. It was actually a paper test. I think. I think we still do
Yep.
paper tests, right?
Yep.
And so my, let's see, I don't know if my colleague did. Maybe that's when she did her general, actually. So it was my colleague who was trying to go from technician to general. She took one test, and my son and my husband and me. And if you take a ham radio license exam, you can take the technician exam. And if you pass it, you can just go straight on and take the general exam right on the spot. And if you pass the general, and you can take the extra right on the spot. And, I hadn't really studied all the levels, but what I found that was kind of interesting that day was my son was just like, no, I'm good. One test is all. My colleague was just there to take the general because I don't know if she tried for extra and didn't pass it that day or like whatever it was.
Hmm.
But my husband was gung ho and he was like, I'm going to take them all. I don't care if, I don't care if I don't pass, I'm just going to try it all. And so we got to the point of you turn in the first test, and they graded it. And like when they said, they said to him, do you want to take the next one? And I don't know if they didn't ask me if I wanted to take another exam, or if I was just like, I don't know, maybe I just didn't project confidence or whatever it was. But then my husband took the other exam and he was like, you can totally pass this. You should do this. And then, like went to the guy and was like, oh no, she should take the second exam. And he's like, I've already filled out the form. So I was just like, this is interesting. And so it's just a matter of that level of expectations and what people expect and what people think, like, oh, well, this engineer guy, of course, he's going to take all the exams, but, this lady, I don't know, I guess she's just going to, do what the kid does, and I recognized that was a limitation. And I was like, oh gosh, if I'm going to get any other higher levels of license, I don't want to do it in this kind of environment. It didn't feel welcoming. It didn't feel inclusive. And so I was like, okay, A, I'm not doing this in this environment again. And B, I'm not bringing my students to do this.
Hmm.
So when we were trying to get the ham radio club off the ground, we went to do the test at the local ham fest, which is a much more like community oriented exercise and a much more open and inviting. And, like there's just a lot more people that participate in a ham fest. They encourage children to take these exams. And so when I went back to do my general and extra, I did them both in the same day. And
Wow.
my students, a bunch of students got their technician license at the same time. And so it was a situation where I felt good about taking a diverse group of women of different ages to an organization. So I learned that you want to be careful about the environment that you go into, even in, ham radio where they're trying to encourage people to go into it. This was not an environment that really worked for me. So
Hmm.
don't be afraid. I guess my lesson here is don't be afraid to pick the environment that you think is going to work for you. Don't be afraid to advocate for yourself. And if you find a place that you feel isn't appropriately welcoming of you, there'll be another place. You don't have to keep going back to that one. You don't have to go back to that club. You can go to a different, you can do testing under a different circumstance. So that's my lesson learned in terms of what I experienced as I believe it was inequity in
Hmm.
the licensing exam situation. But then, all's well that ends well, because the ham fest was a good time for a lot of us to get our licenses in different
Hmm.
levels.
Hmm. Well, that's great. That's great. That's really good information. Yeah, we're planning to do it online. We're planning to do it virtually. And we're working with GLARG, Greater Los Angeles Amateur Radio Club,
Mhm.
because if you've got a college ID, you don't have to pay the exam fee. So
Oh, very nice.
yeah, so that's the plan. So we're going to keep working towards that plan. Um, keep working towards that. So let's just see. We're at the top of the hour.
Mhm.
Are there any other questions? Okay, I see people shaking their heads. All right. Well, Dr. Lovell, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. I really appreciate this. I have new respect for the Arduino because I've been hacking Raspberry Pis and that kind of thing. So
Mhm.
uh, so all right, that's pretty cool. That was quite a story and quite a an effort. That looks like so much fun. That's just crazy good fun, crazy geek fun. Outstanding. Thanks again. Really appreciate your time. And if there are no other questions, we'll say 7 3s and wish you well.
Okay, well, thank you so much for inviting me. This was very fun. I wish you all well, and I know those of you who are Scotties know how to get in touch with me. But Erin, if you have any follow-up questions at any point, if you want to be in touch, Jesse has my email, and you're very welcome to reach out at any point with about anything. No question too big, none too small.
Excellent. I'll be happy to share your contact information with everyone. Thanks so much. Well, all
Okay,
right, folks,
thanks everybody.
seven
Good night.
threes. Take
Bye.
care. Bye-bye.